at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that what we're doing is coming out of the heart of God and is motivated and functioning in love. Otherwise, nothing we do will have any effect whatsoever. Love is the only thing that's going to win in the end. So let's stay in love. And yes, we can have different views, but ultimately we're not disagreeing that love is the answer to the world's problems, because it is, because God is love. So God is the answer to the world's problems. Let's make sure that that answer does not get obscured and hidden behind religious or political stuff, which is designed to do exactly that. And we want the truth to awaken people to the reality of God. And then things will begin to change. Things will change when people change. People change when they encounter God. So that, for me, is our whole thing.
Yes, good day, Mike. Well, it was just a couple days ago. I thought I would start out with and get your reaction to the big news in the United States. We had that ruling that came down from our Supreme Court of a case. Many people in the church movement have had prayer meetings and prayer walks or whatnot regarding the idea of children and the abortion issue. It's 50 years since Roe versus Wade, and a lot of interesting aspects. 50 years being a jubilee a year, biblically speaking. Friday was 6/24. I sensed right away that it was that number 6/24. God bless you and keep you. That particularly keep you part about babies that could be born, and then if the mother didn't want to keep a baby, could be adopted. But more than that too, just that Elijah with the prophets of Baal, a lot of spiritually speaking, that Baal sacrifice type thing. I was just wanted to get your sense about this whole particular issue. It's still available in particular states now. It's not a national mandate. It's now goes back to particular states. So wanted to get your perspective on, all these aspects of blessing, how the Father blesses us in Genesis to be fruitful and multiply, and all the aspects, because it's a really hot issue right now in the United States.
I mean, to be honest, it's such a divisive issue.
Yes.
Within even Christians. I saw someone posted something on Facebook, a friend of mine, saying, great, it's overturned and yay. And then they had probably 12 people came on and basically said, you don't know what you're talking about. And they're Christians, and it wasn't a political thing either. They weren't coming from a Democrat or Republican view. They were just coming from their own perspective of what they feel about the issue. And they were really saying, and I think it's more complicated than just that issue. And, I know people say, well, we've been praying and God's answered our prayers. Well, I'm sure people were praying before it actually came into being either. And God obviously didn't answer those prayers, quote, because it happened. Why didn't God stop it in the first place? So there's a lot of things around there that I think we've got to be very careful. We do not bring God into political issues and then try and make God a political animal, and on favoring a political party, because he doesn't favor either party or any parties. He's God. That being said, I'm totally pro-life. So from the perspective of, do I want to see any babies aborted? Absolutely not. It's not what I would want to see. But on the other side of that, it's okay overturning that and putting it back to each individual state. But are the states where they ban abortions going to put other things in place to help the children, parents, all of those issues? Because it's not as simple as overturning it and banning abortions, because people will have abortions. People had abortions before it was legal anyway. So it's not going to stop it. It's just going to make it more unsafe for those who choose, or they'll go to another state to get it. And obviously New York and California have already said that they will welcome people. A lot of companies have come out and said that they will pay for people's travel. So, it isn't just as simple as, oh, this is all going to stop abortion, because abortion has been going on for thousands of years. So, it's not going to stop it. What I would not want it to make is to have people actually end up killing themselves, or because they get a backstreet abortion, or they get some sort of thing that happens, and then they end up both killing themselves and the child. That won't be helpful. So are the states going to put in issues to deal with people's mental health? Those who then struggle with, maybe they've been raped, now they can't get an abortion in that state, are they going to help support those people, find ways of helping them? Are they going to put money into the system to help? Those are the issues. You can't just come out and say, right, we're banning this, and have nothing in place to help people. And it's okay saying, yes, we'll have lots more babies for adoption, but let's say a teenager gets pregnant, and then, I don't know, 15, 16, then they're forced to go through a whole pregnancy and have to deal with the emotional baggage of all of that, and the pain of carrying something which they don't want. Now, I'm not saying any of it's right, because we're in a fallen world, which, to be honest, is never perfect from a political thing. So there's no perfect answer. So I would ask people to think about the broader picture, and to think about how, if churches have now come out and said, great, this is all about not having abortions, are they going to provide for the people who get pregnant and can't cope with a pregnancy? I mean, you don't have free healthcare. I mean, what are they going to provide for the healthcare, prenatal care and postnatal care, all of that? Is that all going to be free now? Or are the people going to suffer because they can't afford it? And then some people will be able to afford it if they got rich families, and other people won't. And then the child's health would suffer because they're not eating correctly. I mean, there's so much complication to it above the original argument, which I totally wouldn't want abortions in it. But, what happens if someone's raped? How would they cope with the mental thing of carrying a rapist child? It's quite complex. And I think there's got to be a lot more thought about how you support people through pregnancy in place, without just banning it, because you just ban it and people go underground. Drugs are banned, but it doesn't stop people taking them. It's illegal, but people take them anyway, and it causes all sorts of harm. So I feel that it isn't something just to celebrate, without thinking of a much broader, wider perspectives that actually look at the bigger picture, and look at why people are getting pregnant in the first place. Look at prevention rather than cure. Look at educating, and bottom line is, the church don't have any better rates of less child pregnancy or teenage pregnancy than it happens in the world. So they're not doing such a good job, and a lot of them come from relationships within teenage groups within churches. So hey, let's make sure that we're looking at not just the simple exterior thing, but looking behind the surface to make sure things are in place. And there was a lot of good arguments from those who say, well, okay, you're saying God is against killing babies. Absolutely. But God also gives people free will. So where does that lie? Well, they choose, okay, what are the consequences of their choices? Well, whatever the consequences are. So from a perspective, we know law doesn't work, because we know law just promotes sin. This is according to the Bible. So in a sense, just making it, outlawing it, doesn't work. It creates rebellion, and those who want one will get one way or another, but probably a lot of them won't get safely. So you've got to look at the whole picture. And I look at it and I think this is going to be a hugely divisive issue, and it is already dividing your nation, because you're getting a whole lot of people who are now coming out protesting one way and celebrating another way, which just brings another big division on the back of all the other things that are going on in the nation right now, with the sort of Capitol Hill inquiry and all that stuff. I mean, it's a political hot potato, all of it, which I think there have got to be answers which are not political or law. There've got to be answers which are spiritual to deal with why people get into this situation in the first place. Why are they looking for love and looking for it in the wrong way? Because they don't know love. So, and you're always going to get those that probably are maybe having one parent, maybe missing fathers, maybe in impoverished backgrounds, who end up looking for love and end up pregnant in that situation, who are probably going to be the ones who then probably won't make the best decisions about what to do. You know, are the poorer districts and people going to get the support they need? You know, so
yeah, I think this is a door that swings wide open for those who are proponents of life to actually cloak it in love, unconditional love, and we're going to support, we're going to help and be part of solutions going forward, not just legislate more legalism, or we're gonna make it difficult. And Jesus, obviously, he said he came to bring us life and life abundantly. Well, the abundant portion we need to co-labor and be part of as well, so that you're right, there's health care, there's care, and there's love.
Yeah.
That it's love. It's not about a shame thing or you're doing something wrong, but it's about putting our arms around other people and lifting them up out of that difficult situation.
So yeah, I find as soon as you start mixing political issues with spiritual issues, and you try and bring them together, that God is political, then I think you're running into a wrong mindset and a wrong belief system around all this. But I did find that some of the points that people were making were quite from a thought through perspective. They weren't just reacting to this situation. They are Christians who thought through the issues and looked at the bigger picture and had come down on the side of, well, actually, we don't think abortion should be banned in some circumstances. Not just all circumstances, but some circumstances that need to be carefully monitored and addressed. And in general, I know people think, well, okay, that life is wasted. What would have happened to that life? It's not wasted, because they're in heaven and they're being equipped for their heavenly destiny. I've been to the place where all of the abortions and miscarriages and child deaths are, and the angels are equipping them. So they're not dead like any other person's not dead from a spiritual perspective. Yes, they never lived here, but they carry on and live there, and therefore have a future there. So from that perspective also, you can't just say, carte blanche, so, well, we don't death, whatever. Well, because it's more complicated than that. And actually, there's their spirits, so they continue. And they're equipped. I met my 2 grandchildren there, 3 grandchildren actually, who would all have come from miscarriages. Met them, talked to them, engaged with them. So, that was a joyous thing out of sorrow, so it was quite a, such a difficult topic. And I think this is going to create even more divisiveness and potential problems between believers who come down on a very different side of it. But we must be careful we don't attack each other over different views.
Right.
People are entitled to their opinion.
Amen.
And shouldn't be vilified if their opinion differs from yours and mine. That's a key. And I think love has to be the overriding way we treat people all around this, in every way. And I would hope that there is more thought gone into this than just hey, let's give all the states the right to make their choice, based on a deeper understanding of the issues and problems that this could cause, so that people are helped in the way they need help. So I am not celebrating just, oh great, this has been overturned. I am in one sense, pro-life, so I wouldn't be supporting just carte blanche abortions for any reason. But on the flip side of it, I also feel for those who are now going to face a lot of hardship and difficulty and need a lot of support through this.
Wouldn't you say that abortion would come out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Like, if I'm a person and I get pregnant, I mean, I'm not a female, obviously, but I get pregnant, then I will, or I choose, I'm going to do this, as opposed to, this is perhaps, from God makes all things work together for good. Blessings and love will come forth from this event. What's your perspective? And the Destiny Scroller, Psalm 139, the Lord knew us before he knit me into my mother's womb. Standing in the way of that manifestation, that creative glory that comes forth.
Yeah. And in some circumstances, that would be how I would see it. Obviously, God would bring a good out of every situation, but he could also bring good out of every situation, whichever way we look at it. So you can't just say one way or another, because God cares for every individual, irrespective. I think using a rhetoric of murder and that type of thing is not helpful. And to try and shame somebody and make them feel so guilty and condemned that they're going to go to hell if they do this type of thing, that's not how God does things. And yes, people make mistakes and people do things, and that has consequences, and some of those consequences are negative and not good. But I think we've got to take this, what is God's heart, and it's not a modern issue. You go back in history, it's in the Bible, and I think from what I read, they were allowed to under Jewish law, because it's not mentioned in the Bible as a thing you can't do. Obviously, yes, you got the 10 Commandments in thou shalt not kill, but there were instances where some were told to. So
is there
it's
a spiritual component to it, like Baal worship, sacrifice, blood sacrifice?
And of course, that's very different from an abortion. I mean, you can't equate a sacrifice as an offering to a god to a, let's say, a 15-year-old, 16-year-old who was raped or got pregnant having abortion. You can't equate the two. And if you try and equate those things, you are again vilifying the people who go through that. And I just don't feel that's the right approach. It's not the same thing. They were sacrificing to a god for power. It was totally different from someone getting pregnant, right? And not knowing how they're going to cope with being pregnant. Single parent, 5 children, they get pregnant, their mother can't look after them, they're struggling, they haven't got enough food anyway. I mean, it's horrendous. And to be put into that position, I could understand a young person not knowing what to do and not feeling they've got the right support or even to make a decision, and feeling, I don't think very many people just get abortions carte blanche without any thought. I mean, people would weigh, and most of the abortion clinics have to ask the questions and give sort of a question and answer thing. It's not just, oh, we'll just go and do this. And I feel there are things there which, okay, where do you draw the line in who makes the decisions about these things? And you make a decision by law, that law is not going to stop people. So, putting more funding into helping people make the right decisions is what I would think should be done. But by just using very inflammatory rhetoric is not helpful. I don't think it's helpful in any shape or form in this issue, because unless you've been there and gone through it and know exactly what the emotions were, what the feelings were, how someone was, feeling potentially shame and guilt or condemnation, how they might have been feeling oppressed or depressed, you know, just to sort of say,
Yeah,
you know,
trauma, whatever it
yeah,
might be,
this, that,
right?
and the other. You know, I think it's too simplistic just to make a carte blanche thing like that without really looking at the whole issue and looking at how we can help people across the board. You know, and I feel, from what I can understand and what I've listened to, and I'm coming from a pro-life position, the arguments that I've seen for Christians who have come on the other side of that issue were well thought out and weren't sort of operating out of a heart which was just sort of, you know, some of the pro-life stuff I don't like the way that it's been presented, you know, and some of it, I mean, some pro-life people will go out and kill people to stop abortions, which is just how utterly ridiculous even to think that that's acceptable as well.
Absolutely.
You know, they'll go and blow up abortion clinics. I mean, it's madness.
Right.
You know, and it's like, okay, babies have life, but adults don't. I mean, what about the situation where the mother would be at risk of dying if they went to term? What about that situation? Whose life is more important? Now, ultimately, both of them are going to have an eternity with God. Whose life is more important? And I think I couldn't say. Yes, I could not make that judgment on whose life is more important. If my wife, if, you know, we were in a position still there, you know, being with children or whatever, and she was told that if she carried on with this, she's likely to die,
right,
I would not be wanting her to die.
Correct.
Because if she did die, I'd be looking after a baby that I would be totally ill-equipped to look after. So for me, in that situation, what would I do? I mean, it would be a terrible thing. I mean, I was so pro-life that even when I was working in a hospital, I refused to do tests which would give people information about so they could get an abortion for things like, you know, genetic diseases, Down syndrome, that type of stuff. You know, I refused to work in the department. I was taken before the head of the hospital that had to sort of give an answer. And I just said, look, you can do whatever you like to me, but I'm not doing it. So simple as that. So I come from a very strong position on this, but I also want people to respect other people's views and you know, don't use the rhetoric which calls them supporters of baby killing and just murderers and all that type of stuff. They're not just making that assumption. I think the pro-life people, some of them, are not as thoughtful about the position as those that have thought it through. It's a topic which a lot of people just embrace without having thought it all through or thought it through the implications. And I don't think a lot of people have thought through the implications of what this is going to do now for those who now are refused abortions and have to face war, you know, and they need help. You know, they do need help, and finding ways to help them is really, really important right now, not just celebrating that this is ended. You know, and I would never say that God has answered people's prayers to end this, because people have done that. Not just as much as God did not answer people's prayers, or did answer people's prayers when it was first brought out 50 years ago. Because there must have been a huge outcry at the time, and there must have been churches all over the US praying, asking God that this would not be a law which was put through. So the whole case of Roe versus Wade, you know, there must have been. So are they saying that?
I mean, the whole issue is just about division too. I mean, as we stated, and you know, that's the primary tactic of the enemy, to come in, to kill, steal, and destroy and divide. And that's what the big struggle. I mean, even in Engaging God, you've talked so much about union and blessings, in that it's so important to find our common ground together in love, unconditionally, regardless of our perspective, regardless of our past hurts, and to move forward in that heart position of love.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it is a complex issue that when, I think there was a comment in the chat about, well, this is an open door for judgment. Well, God is not going to judge the US and hasn't judged the US on the basis of this or any other nation, because he's not going to do that in a negative sense. If there's a reaping what you've sown, okay, how's about all the people who died in the US from guns? Is God going to judge that because all of those people? Oh no, because the Second Amendment gives, and that's God's amendment. It's not. God is never going to give any permission to kill anybody for whatever you think your constitution says. So let's balance it all up. If you're saying, oh, this opens the door to judgment, well, does not gun crime open the door to judgment and all of the people killing people because they can get their hands on automatic weapons? I mean, you've got to look at the whole picture and look at the whole issue and say, how many people die every year of gun crime in the US? How many people are murdered? Well, they're killed. That you would say exactly the same thing. That would open the door to huge amounts of judgment. Well, not from God.
I think you're getting onto something too, Mike, about your recent video, Unconditional Love 3 that you put out. You talked about these mindsets and these structures that we have in our mind that need to come down for unconditional love to be flowing from the Father into me and vice versa. That whole deconstruction process, that is a huge construct in the Patriot movement. There's this Patriot movement within, I guess, within this country. And there's a lot of evangelicals that, that Second Amendment is like, it would be like a whole book in the Bible if they could have it be that way.
It's seen as a God-given right. And I do not believe God will give anyone the right to own a gun to shoot somebody.
No.
It's like this, okay. The thing, well, I need it to defend myself. Okay. Well, how are you going to defend yourself with it? You're going to shoot somebody. So bottom line is, it's such a complex issue when you look at these things take all of the political rhetoric out, take all of the religious mindsets out of it. And what does the heart of God say? What does the heart of God actually say? The US, was a British colony.
Correct.
You took that sort of independence, which was British people as well as other nationalities who fought that war. I mean,
right.
That's, most people originally were British who came. So, okay, they decided, well, no, this is our nation for whatever reason. Obviously, the taxation of the tea and all that was just the tip of the iceberg, I guess, or the straw that broke the camel's back,
That's
let's
right.
say. And
the excuse for it.
Yeah, the excuse for it. And I understand that British colonialism and empire spirit, totally wrong, totally outside of the context of God's kingdom. It shouldn't, we went over there and what did we do? Took the country from who? The indigenous people who were living there.
Right. We took it from somebody else. So
right. Yeah, and destroyed them. And therefore
the French were here too. The French were in Canada. The French came into parts Louisiana, of Wisconsin and Michigan, other parts.
Yep. There were, a lot of immigration, obviously. But all of those people, they took their land from somebody else. So let's get back to brass tacks. You're all going to give up all your land and go live back in the countries that you came from with your origin? No, you're not, because you think this is your country. Well, ultimately, it's not. It's not your country. It's God's. The whole world belongs to the Lord.
Amen.
He have every nation to operate as family with other nations, not in, division and conflict and all the other things that take place. But we're living in a world which has been controlled by those who thrive on conflict and all that stuff. So they want division. They don't want a world to be together in any way in love, obviously. So it is quite a difficult one. And I think as soon as you start thinking God has given you political rights, I think you're running in a very wrong direction. You have a constitution which was given to you by people. not God. The same as our constitution in the UK was given to us by people, not God.
And
our
most of the they're saying a lot of the Constitution was written actually by Freemasons.
No, well, definitely by
So there's
Freemasons.
a demonic element to those roots. If you want to get, if you
Huge.
want to boil it down to its purity,
Yeah.
which a lot of people seem to want to try
Yeah.
to talk about purity and original intent.
Yeah. And the original intent was written in another context. It was written from having just revolted and fought for the nation. So the right to bear arms, I doubt very much whether those original founding fathers would have envisaged what it's become today. No way that they would envisage that. They were saying the right to bear arms because they had a threat that the UK were going to come back, or Britain was going to come back and take it back by war.
Right.
So you had the right to actually protect your nation from external attack, not a fighting against one another. I don't think that was the original intent. And it certainly wouldn't be God's intent that you would be looking to kill one another for whatever reason. You know, and you look at the UK, and we're far from perfect when it comes from history and when it comes to current politics, but we have no right to bear arms. It's not part of our constitution. It hasn't been for hundreds of years. People can own a gun in a gun club if they want to shoot. You can have a shotgun if you're a farmer to protect your crops from foxes or whatever. But you can't own a handgun or any other gun. And gun crime, although it does exist within sort of some of the drug, more to do with drugs than anything else, or criminality. But I don't know what the figures are, but I know the figures in the UK for the total number of deaths, homicides, is only a few thousand a year. I mean, you have more than that in one city in the US. Well, why? Because you have guns available to everybody. Then people are going to use them, which the consequence is a lot of people are going to die. If you didn't have the guns, some people would still get them. But if they weren't available from the beginning, then you'd have far less of them around, and therefore far less deaths associated with it. Now, I know that people will say, oh, what are you talking about? British person don't understand, oh, blah, blah, blah. I just point to the figures. Look at all your gun deaths. If you're happy with that, I'm sad for you. If you're happy with that number of people dying and people going in and shooting up schools and everything else. I think in the UK, we've only ever had one school shooting, which was in Dunblane in Scotland many years ago. We just don't have it because we don't have access to guns like that. You cannot go and buy one anywhere.
And then it spins a lot of conspiracy theory, like the gun people will say that the people who did this were MK Ultra by the anti-gun movement to try to put in place gun laws, just a lot of crazy rhetoric to keep in place a gun on everybody's hip walking into a grocery store. Like it's the Wild West.
Oh, absolutely. And ultimately, when you think about all these issues, what perspective are we coming from? Is it God's perspective? Is it a kingdom perspective? Have we checked out this with God, or are we just inflaming the thing because we have this fundamental issue around it? I was doing a conference just before lockdown in Phoenix, Arizona. I did this conference, and there was supposed to be a guy who was also going to do the conference, who was a guy, I'm not going to talk about his name, but he chose not to come because I think this was just before lockdown in the US and just before this was taking off. He chose not to come because he was afraid if he left his house and came to the conference, then people would come and take away his guns. That's the reason he didn't come to do a Christian conference about, actually the title was Quantum Faith. I mean, literally. I mean, seriously. I mean, is that actually a reason? I mean, it's all fear-based. You know, if we truly knew our authority as sons of God, we wouldn't need to go around carrying guns.
Amen.
I know people will say, well, that's just idealistic. Well, Jesus didn't go around carrying a sword, and they definitely tried to kill him. You know, and when he used the analogy of a sword, he wasn't talking about using the sword to kill people. He was talking about using it to divide and make it clear which side one thing was on as another, you know. And of course, when Peter did pull out a sword and cut off the guy's ear, Jesus put it back on, healed him. You know, so there was a real sense there that, you know, that wasn't, Jesus didn't come to form a kingdom based in a political arena by force of arms. You know, his kingdom wasn't of this world in that way. So I think we've got to be realistic in looking at these issues and actually say, where does it come from? What is God's heart? You know, and there's a lot of issues of things in the US and in other parts of the world where things are definitely not operating according to God's kingdom. And you could look at all the pharmaceutical companies who you know, put an epidemic of oxycodone stuff in the US, and hundreds of thousands of people's lives destroyed, killed, and families broken up and destroyed for profit and greed. But God isn't judging that, because he wouldn't judge that, because he loves the people doing it. Of course, he's not happy that hundreds of thousands of people have died. Now, you could say the enemy's definitely taken advantage of those people's greed and have used it to kill a whole lot of people, because the enemy robs, kills, and destroys. But where's the government to deal with that? You know, where's the political issue to deal with that? And where are the Christians who are actually coming out and having movements against the drug companies? Not that many of them that I've seen. No one's even mentioning it. But how many people die because of the greed of pharmaceutical companies? So there's a whole lot of issues that really need addressing. But the only way we're going to address it is people's lives change as they embrace God's kingdom and they then look to bring about love. You're never going to change it by law. But love will change it. Love will win in the end. You know, it's just, you know, how willing are we to operate in love? And I think that's the question we should be asking, you know, which is, you know, a question that we need to divorce from the political and go back to the kingdom. Because I think there's just so much political rhetoric and people who are causing division because of political disagreements. And I don't think that's helpful at all in having an environment of peace. We had the same thing when it came to Brexit and all that stuff in the UK. It caused such division, you know, and you had a lot of Christians on one side and some on the other side. But the reason for it on one side was all the sort of futurist, oh yeah, Europe and the, yeah, this and the other, all the stuff, you know, all the futurist eschatology stuff. Oh, we don't want to be part of Europe because Europe's going to be that and the other. And it's just like, oh, come on, get a life. You know, I just, in the end, I was just so fed up with it all. You know, that it was just like, this is only going to cause more and more problems between people. It's not going to solve the problems, and the political solution won't. And I'm not saying God's against government per se, because he talks us to pray for those in government. But those people in government weren't responsible for the Christian stuff, you know, for the stuff that we're responsible, spiritual stuff, you know. And I think there's been such a thing about Christian government, and you know, and I think the whole thing about prayer in schools and all of that stuff, and I think it's just trying to mix it all up, and it obscures the real issues, and sort of majors on the minors, when if we're looking at how can we see God's kingdom, you know, impact a nation so that people in that nation are operating in love, well, that would be the answer to the nation's problems, all of our nations. If we all operated in love to one another, no one's going to steal or kill or rob or do any of those negative things, are you, if you're operating in love? So love is the issue. That's the only way you're going to stop all the negative, terrible things that go on, if people actually awaken to love and start behaving differently to one another by loving one another. So I think that's probably, you know, what we should be focusing on, rather than getting caught up in all the political arguments around stuff, you know. And
have you seen some of that breakthrough personally with regard to the Earth Shield and legislating, you know, union and unconditional love, the limitless grace of Father? Like, have you seen that momentum build? That, or I should just ask what your perspective of the Earth Shield is. Right? Yeah,
I would say people are awakening, and therefore there is more spiritual frequency of love in the world. But of course, then that the enemy opposes that. So then you'll get things that happen like wars and other things and political divides. And I mean, you know, you've got your midterm elections coming up. Then you've got another election in 2 years. It's like, I'm just not looking forward to it. You know, I'm in another country, but I'm not looking forward to it because of what happened last time. You still got your stuff going on at that Capitol Hill and all that stuff right now. And there's all sorts of stuff coming out about that, which is like a lot of Christians were in that.
Well, there are a lot of Christians who believe Donald Trump is still the president.
Yeah, I know.
And next week he'll be in the White House.
Yeah,
I mean, it's gone to a whole new level of wow.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I blocked hundreds of people who were promoting that stuff on my Facebook feed, so I don't see it anymore. So I'm totally unaware of what people are saying now, but I wouldn't be surprised that would be the mindset for some people, because those people have not come out and acknowledged that they were wrong. You know, that, you know, it didn't happen, it's not going to happen. And rather than supporting the government that you've got, you're just trying to undermine it all the time. Well, I don't think that is very helpful. You never had that in the past. You didn't have that. Okay, someone lost. Well, okay, they were there to maintain a sense of, you can't just do anything you want, but your system is set up for division. I mean, if the Democrats lose the House, you know, or the Senate or whatever, and they lose some of the senators, it's like you're going to end up with a president who basically can't make any decisions because his government can't function, really, which is like, okay, oh, well, that's checks and balances. No, all that does is just create chaos. We're going to shut down the government because we're not going to agree the budget. I mean, you just don't get that in the UK.
Well, then they'll try, just like the Democrats wanted to impeach Trump. Yep. Then the Republicans will want it for the next 2 years, try to impeach Biden. I mean, then they'll just, and that is all the playbook of the enemy, to divide.
Totally.
And hate.
At the end of the day, if the government in the UK is one that I didn't want ideologically or whatever, or didn't choose, if they come into government, I am not going to undermine them with my attitude towards them in any way. If they do something which is totally outrageously wrong, which they're doing right now in certain areas, which is like, okay, I am going to say, no, I don't agree with that, but I'm still I wouldn't want to be in government to try and make those decisions and come to conclusions in the midst of a pandemic for 2 years and now a war which is affecting the whole world in food shortages and all the other potential issues and inflation and, you know, huge issues that the world is facing right now. Let's pull together. Let's come up with joint things. And I was very happy to see that actually there was a joint agreement on gun control that was sensible and was agreed to make sure it's harder for underage people or younger people to actually buy guns, which is like, praise God that they came together and made an agreement. Now that should be more. They should be looking, how can we make joint solutions here? How can we support each other in coming to a consensus of agreement, cross-party politics, that actually is looking for the benefit of the country rather than their own political party and agenda? Because that's what it is. It is now, if a Democrat is in, we will oppose him, irrespective of whether he's doing things which actually make sense. And if a Republican's in, we're going to oppose it. Now that is just divisive and will not help any nation make the right choices and decisions to help people, because it just is so hard to get anything through legislation, which is not good. Let's come together. We might have differences, but surely we want the best for a nation that we're living in, rather than to make it divisive and hard and politically a terrible place to live. I mean, and believers seem to be no different. They just seem to be divided politically and unable to even believe the other side could possibly be a Christian and support another party. I mean, it's just madness, total madness, but it is the state that people are in. And I showed how far people have gone away from love.
Right. You know, one of the interesting aspects of this Great Awakening is the awakening of our identity as sons, Mike. And I believe there's a big momentum. There's a lot of people leaving the church age and coming into their identity as sons. What would you say are a couple practical things that people as sons can do to take our position to rule and reign in that governmental realm, to bring forth some of the ideas and the thoughts and the mind of Father into the earth, on earth as it is in heaven?
I would say initially, there needs to be a level of intimacy that unveils the Father's heart to us, that will deconstruct our minds so that we're not coming from an earthly tree of the knowledge good and evil perspective, but a kingdom heavenly one. Because God is not going to give you authority in the heavens if you're going to use it selfishly or out of the wrong knowledge. So people will say, oh yeah, I'm going to legislate this. It'll never have any authority, and heaven won't recognize it if it's not coming from the heart of God and is filled with mixture. So we need intimacy to reveal God's heart. Then what we do comes out of God's heart. So we establish in heaven the heart of God, so the heart of God can be outworked on earth. That's the basis of it. You know, all of the the rest of it is just empty hot air if you don't operate as Jesus did, only doing what he saw the Father doing. Now, Jesus didn't do anything of his own accord independently with the wrong thinking, because he was totally submitted to the Father's desire. And he overcame the wrong thinking in the wilderness when he basically said, look, this is what God said. Yeah. These are the words that have come from the mouth of God. You know, I'm not gonna take the shortcut to world kingdom domination, because what would have happened if he had done, he would establish a Luciferian kingdom on earth, because that was the agenda of Babel. And I can offer you all these kingdoms, just worship me, you know. And that's the offer that the enemy will always have, some shortcuts. Now Jesus overcame it and was not subject to that going forward. Therefore his thinking was not coming out of the wrong understanding, and therefore he was not operating politically, you know. So I think what we need to do is know the heart of God, know the heart of the Father, and then align ourselves with it and ask him, what do you want me to do in alignment with your heart, you know, and then do it. And they live in love and love people. That means stop creating division, stop vilifying people if they disagree, stop actually only being in relationship with people who agree with you. So don't set up a belief system. Have relationship, have family, love one another, honor one another for our differences and the fact that we've been designed and created differently, so that we will have a diverse representation of who God is on earth. So for me, it's all really based in love, and therefore the government that we legislate is going to be done in love. You know, no one can right now sit in the heavens on a throne and
Mhm.
start legislating out of a political agenda,
Correct.
because it won't work. Because God is not going to allow people in heaven to operate in a kangaroo court, or I've seen people talk about taking people into the courts of heaven and getting God to judge them, and it's just like nonsense. They're not in a heavenly court, they're in a demonic court somewhere, thinking they can do that. But they do, because they base it on the wrong view of God as this someone who's going to punish people. And you get all of the sort of, the prophetic stuff. I remember years ago, there was this big conference in Lancaster, I think in California, and there's all of this doom and gloom and judgment on the US and terrible stuff said. Well, none of it happened, did it? And I think people were saying, okay, so God is going to judge a country that actually is still majority Christian, and where the majority still go to church, as opposed to some country that basically doesn't believe in God at all and permits headhunting or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, well, if God was going to judge it, you'd think he would judge something like that, but he's not. He's wanting to bless, not judge in a negative way. The judgment is already made. Innocence. He wants to restore innocence. He wants to restore identity to innocence. So he's not going to come out and make these punishment things of, bringing terrible pestilence and things on the US or other countries, and California is going to fall into the sea, and that one comes out of the Rick Joyner camp.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And they're promoting it, wanting it. Because it's like, well, God's going to judge Hollywood for the terrible stuff they do. Really? And I think that's part of the problem. People are believing that their own political rhetoric of let's arm ourselves because we're going to have civil war, and let's promote civil war because that's the only way we're going to take our nation back. I mean, seriously, it's just not God. But it's promoted as God, and it's prophesied as God saying it. At the end of the day, we've got to make sure that what we're doing is coming out of the heart of God and is motivated and functioning in love. Otherwise, nothing we do will have any effect whatsoever. Love is the only thing that's going to win in the end. So let's stay in love. Yeah. And yes, we can have different views, but ultimately we're not disagreeing that love is the answer to the world's problems, because it is, because God is love. So God is the answer to the world's problems. Let's make sure that that answer does not get obscured and hidden behind religious or political stuff, which is designed to do exactly that. And we want the truth to awaken people to the reality of God. And then things will begin to change. Things will change when people change. People change when they encounter God. So that, for me, is our whole thing. Hi, everyone. We're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc. And we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.